Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to all those that are joining us this Thursday night, the eighth night of Chanukah, as we celebrate the joy of being Jewish. Isn't that what Chanukah is really all about? We look at the lights, the illumination, the warmth. That's what being Jewish is all about, and that's what, as we'll learn tonight, what the Greeks wanted to try to take away. So let us start with an idea that, good evening, Carol. As I'd like to share, firstly, a little story that occurred, one that I've told in the morning, but I don't think it's the same people that are here. So I'm sure they will enjoy the story, and then we'll go on to a deep and profound thought relating to Chanukah. Okay, don't worry. I won't keep you too long, just long enough, hopefully, to lift our spirits as we head towards the Shabbos. So the story relates to a woman. Her name was Sonia Tomarkin. She grew up in the Soviet Union. Good evening, Rebecca. And she grew up in the Soviet Union and managed to get out, I think it was in the 80s, and she made her way to the United States. And she was very privileged on one occasion to be invited to a conference that took place in Philadelphia. And at this conference, it was an auspicious occasion when no less than George W. Bush, the President of the United States of America, was going to make a presentation at this conference. The presentation was the Liberty Medal that would be presented to Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev, of course, was known for glasnost, for reining in and pulling down the Berlin Wall, communism, and opening up the Soviet Union from the repression that they had suffered for so long. And so he was going to present him with this great, wonderful award at this ceremony. It was September 2008. She was sitting there, and all of a sudden she had to be excused. So she made her way out of the conference, and obviously it meant the world to her, having lived under communism and then seeing this award. It meant so much to her. And as she comes out of the bathroom, lo and behold, coming towards her is none other than Mikhail Gorbachev. And she can hardly believe her eyes. But Sonia decided to make the most of this opportunity. And she says, I want to express my gratitude to you, Mr. Gorbachev, because what you have given me, I cannot describe. You have given me, you have given my family, you have given my community, and you have given my people freedom, liberty, the ability to practice our faith and to live with the basic civil liberties. And I want to thank you so much. And I'd be honored and delighted if you could sign my program. Mikhail Gorbachev, without saying a word, took out his pen. In front of all the security, he signed, made his signature on the page. And he then turned to her and he said, I want to tell you something. You mentioned about the fact that you are Jewish and that now you are able to live a free life practicing your Jewish faith, and that's what you and your family are doing. Says Mikhail Gorbachev, you living your life as a Jew, being able to practice your faith without repression, is my autograph. You are my autograph every single time you are able to practice your faith. Astounding, astonishing, incredible man. Following on from that, I heard from Rabbi Jacobson, who told the story, that he said in reality, we think about it, when God looks at the Jewish people, you know what he says? You are my autograph. Each time that we act in a godly fashion, each time we do a mitzvah, each time that we lift somebody's spirits, then we are, as it were, signing God's autograph in this world. It's an astounding story. Michael, good evening. I hope you didn't miss the beginning and the first story, but if you did, rewind afterwards. I can't repeat it again, but you may have heard it in the morning in any case. So we continue, friends, with a deep idea. It's lovely to be back in the warmth, being able to speak to you as opposed to the, however wonderful it was, the out on the streets of Woodside Park and further beyond as we danced our way through Chanukah with Chabad. It was amazing. But I'm also happy to be back in front of the screen. So the miracle of Chanukah we're all familiar with. The miracle of oil. It's something that we've grown up with. We have to start thinking about things, and I'm trying to impress it on all of us and on myself, this idea, and that is we have to think about things in a more sophisticated way, in a more mature way, as opposed to just looking at things, scratching the surface. It may have been enough when we were younger just to say, well, God performed a miracle with the oil and that's it, but the same way that we have matured and advanced and developed ourselves in terms of our outlook to life, our philosophy, our understanding, our appreciation, our sensitivity, so it is in terms of our Jewish vision, the lens through which we are able to see the world as Jews. We have to also have a certain maturity now, and therefore look at things afresh. So let's have a look at the miracle of Chanukah. So we know that no miracle that God ever performs is done by chance, and therefore God always, the game plan is always to stick to nature. God does not want, as it were, to reveal himself openly anymore in the world. Those days are long gone. And therefore, as much as he can, it's always covert. It's always within the daily grind of our lives that if we look carefully, we see him. So therefore, we have to ask the question, there was already a miracle on the battlefield. Surely that would suffice. Why is it God needed to make a miracle with the oil? And secondly, he could have made a different miracle, a much easier miracle, quote unquote. And that would have been if God would have made a miracle with the leaving a few more flasks of oil that would have been untainted. They would have been uncontaminated. God didn't need to make sure to orchestrate it so that every single flask was broken and there was only this one flask left, requiring an open miracle. God could have made it quite simply. There happened to be enough oil left miraculously for the rest of Chanukah. Why? So let's have a look and understand things based on a Medrash and a Maharal, and with that, hopefully we'll be able to wrap things up. So the Medrash says as follows, that at the beginning of time, we know when creation took place, the earth was desolate, it was empty. And there was darkness on the surface of the deep. That's what the verse says. Reb Shimon ben Lakish says that there are 4 references to emptiness in the story of creation. And each one of those statements of emptiness in terms of creation represents what is emptiness. That's exile. That's right. So he says each one of them represent the 4 exiles that the Jewish people had to experience and had to struggle with. There was the Babylonian exile. There was the Greek exile. There was the Persian exile. There was the which one did I miss out? The Roman exile, right? So the 4 exiles. So the question is, what is interesting is that the darkness, the word darkness referring to one of those statements of emptiness, one of those exiles, refers no less to the Greek exile. Why is it? Everyone wonders why particularly when it came to the exile of the Greeks, that is the one that is considered darkness. Consider for a second the Roman exile. It was much more harsh than the Greeks. Some of the greatest sages were persecuted and tortured and murdered in a very cruel manner. The Jewish life was almost impossible to live. So why is it that only in the Greek exile is referred to as darkness? Okay. So the Maharal suggests as follows. Okay, this is the Maharal of Prague. Anyone that's been to Prague will remember going to the Maharal Shul. And he said as follows. He said that the service of the temple was the focal point of the relationship between God and the Jewish people. Again, the service that used to be carried out, in other words, the temple service, the sacrifices, all that used to happen when we were in that wonderful idyllic existence of having a temple and having the divine presence rest amongst us. So then The temple service was that umbilical cord between the Jewish people and God. And he says the Greek strategy was unlike the Romans that we've already mentioned, that were far more cruel, or the Egyptians that were far more cruel. The Greeks were not interested in persecuting and oppressing us per se. The Greek strategy was purely to torment the Jewish people, to ridicule the Jewish people, to try to convince the Jewish people that their beliefs, our philosophy, our outlook was fundamentally flawed and was farcical. And therefore they wanted to belittle our beliefs. It wasn't a matter of wiping out the people. They wanted to show us that the depth that you associate with Judaism, the way that you associate that God is in this world, and that the purpose of creation and the purpose of you being a special nation, the chosen people with a divine mission, forget all of that, right? And therefore they went about demonstrating that through defiling the temple. That's one of the things that they did. They made a mockery of it, right? And by defiling something that was holy, they're showing that there's no significance. We don't need to destroy it because there's no importance. We're just going to show you that it's nothing. Your practices are nothing. It's worthless. They'd already, of course, stopped the learning of Torah, and what they had also done they had tried to demonstrate that the learning of the Torah was no more significant than any intellectual exercise like the Hellenist philosophy and beliefs, the Greek philosophy, Aristotle and the like. And therefore they wanted to bring us down. You know, when you feel challenged in life, I always tell my children, there are two ways of dealing with when one feels challenged. You can either bring yourself up or you can bring the other person down. Our approach is always that we raise our game. The Greek philosophy was, let's pull the Jewish people down. We'll show them that they're not special. They're no different to anyone or anything else. Forget this idea of being the chosen people, the moral conscience of the world. And therefore they defiled the temple. And therefore they went about making a mockery of Jewish philosophy and beliefs. And therefore, for the Jewish people just to have won the war, the battle of the war, right? That in itself, although it was a miracle, it would not have restored their lost faith in the special relationship and the chosenness of the Jewish people, the sanctity that we had, the sacredness in which we have our mission. And therefore it was specifically in the area of temple service, which is what symbolizes the unique umbilical cord of connection and relationship between us and God. That is something that was essential to be restored, and basically to impress upon us, the Jewish people, to do one thing and one thing only: believe in yourselves. Believe in who you really are. Do you really believe in who you are? Or do you think, well, like the Greeks are saying, you're no different to them? And that's why thousands converted to Hellenism. They left the faith, they left the fold, because they were convinced by the arguments of the Greeks that they're no different to anyone else. Okay, so with that in mind, let me tell you a story. Sorry, I should say good evening to those that are joining us. Apologies, so rude. Giles, good evening. Powell, good evening. Michael, good evening again. And everyone else that are out there on YouTube and Facebook and everywhere else. So the story goes as follows. We're in the outback in Australia. I can't remember. I know it's somewhere near Victoria. True story in the 1900s, I believe. And the story goes about a couple that came from the Heim. They came to Australia, and they decided that when they left the Heim, they decided to leave not just the country, but their beliefs, their faith, their commitment behind. The association was negative persecution, and therefore they didn't want to practice in any way or let on that they were Jewish. And so they were completely secular. One day they found themselves in a situation where they were late at night, and they were on a horseback, and they needed to make their way to find some shelter for the night. It was a long night, long travel, And they found a little inn and they settled in for the night. And that night, the husband, they'd never done anything really Jewish, but he found a candle and he realized, he worked out that it was the first night of Chanukah. And he said to his wife, listen, I know that we made a commitment to each other when we left the Heim, when we left Europe, that we weren't going to make any demonstrations, no signs of being Jewish. We're not going to let on that we're Jewish. But there is nobody here. We're in the outback. There's nobody here for thousands of miles. I just want to light one candle, just for once. And eventually she argued, but she relented. And he lit that candle and he made Shechianu, and it made such an impression on him because, of course, he'd left it all behind and all the memories came flooding back. And they went to sleep that night. And after a few minutes of being asleep, there was a knock on the door, pounding on the door. And they open the door and there's this figure they can just make out of pouring with rain outside. And there's a policeman who's absolutely drenched standing there. And he says to them, you need to pack your bags and get out in the next few minutes. This whole area is flooding. The floods have gone to the river. The river's burst its banks, and this whole area is going to be flooded in the next hour. The policeman, as he turned round to make his way out the area, he says, and by the way, I would have known to look into this derelict house were it not for the fact that you had that little flame that was burning in the window. That little flame of their faith that they had reignited was something that saved their lives. And they were, of course, made such an impression on them that they decided to reignite their commitment to their faith. And therefore, in short, the message and the lesson that we learn from the Chanukah story is the fact that the Greeks were different to the others. They wanted to bring darkness to our lives, to look at life in a very superficial fashion, to look at the world like them, eat, drink, and be merry, and don't worry about anything. Don't think too deeply. Don't look at intellect more than an intellectual exercise. There is no profundity in life. There is no depth or meaning. There is no long term. There is no future. There is no next world. And the time of the Chanukah story, when they rededicated that temple, it wasn't about the temple. It was about themselves. It was about the Jewish leadership once again believing in themselves, and that light, that faith was able to explode and to spread throughout the Jewish world once again. Wishing everyone well. Keep safe, keep well. Have a wonderful Chanukah and a good Shabbos. Take care.